Chancellor of Rhodes University, the Honorable Judge Lex Mpati, and Vice Chancellor Professor Sizwe Mabizela, Chairperson of Council, Judge Gerald Bloem, and members of the University Council, the executive management, the deans, the academic, administrative, and support staff of the university, the president of the SRC, Ms. Avukleni Chala, fellow graduates and family members, students and friends of the university, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and also distinguished Professor Paul Malem, who introduced me. Thank you very much. Much as I'm delighted to be acknowledged by such an award, I'm overwhelmed by a strong feeling that time is running out. Far from being satisfied with a lifetime's work, I feel that I have not achieved nearly enough. Time is running out for me personally, with only a few years left to make a difference to our society. But far more worrying is that time is running out for all of us, not just in South Africa, and not just for us as human society with all our failures. I recently came back from a trip to Nepal, where the glaciers are melting. As I flew back home, there were more devastating floods in Mozambique, in Malawi, and in Port St. John's in the Eastern Cape. We are responsible not only for each other as human society, but for other sentient beings, and indeed for all life, for forests, and for the biodiversity that is being lost as I speak here. However, now is not the time for cynicism, nor is it the time for protest. Some argue that we have run out of time already, facing the gravest challenge of the past 200 years. It is a challenge to all of us as engaged intellectuals, to which we must respond. At the same time that climate change is a grave threat, it necessitates a transition to a different society, a different economy. This is an opportunity to which we as engaged intellectuals can and must respond. We have the space and the position to explore alternatives, to put forward new models, to envision the future. I remain convinced that we do have answers to the great challenges that climate change poses, as well as answers to social injustice on a global scale and to the obscene inequality in our own society. Our role as academics is to research and test these solutions. Our role as activists is to convince those in power that change is not only inevitable, but is a necessary and positive opportunity for society. We have to, as is said, think globally and act locally to ensure that the future is both sustainable and equitable. One of the solutions that we are piloting in Nelson Mandela Bay through the Transition Township project is community-owned renewable energy through township neighborhood cooperatives, which feed electricity generated from PV solar into the municipal grid, thus contributing to a just energy transition. Another solution that we should be exploring further is at the sub-regional level. Climate change does not acknowledge national borders. We need to build a resilient and integrated regional economy, inclusive, and dealing with labor migration as an integral part of our economy rather than a problem, rather than dealing with it as xenophobia. We need to use climate-smart agriculture for regional food sovereignty, renewable energy, and green industrialization for energy democracy. Things are simply moving too slowly. One of the quotes that I lived by from when I was 19, when I got involved with what Paul Malem described, was to know and not to act is not to know. This is a saying of the Neo-Confucian philosopher Wang Yangming, who promoted the doctrine of the unity of knowing and acting. In another quote that I've attempted to live by, Carlos Cristo, who was a prisoner of conscience, said the following: "We are free only when we commit ourselves to the risk of history, when we decide to intervene in reality in such a way that it will be transfigured by our actions." So my philosophy, as reflected in these quotes, has not really changed over the past 5 decades now. What has changed is the challenge that society faces. We can only act in response to what faces us here and now. And J.R.R. Tolkien wrote in his famous Lord of the Rings, and I quote, "Other evils there are that may come, yet it is not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are set, uprooting the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule." So lastly, among the many people who have accompanied me on this long journey, I would like to acknowledge a few people locally. I can't acknowledge everybody, but I wanted to acknowledge my friend Shepherd Marty, who is an academic here at Rhodes University now, who influenced my life of activism and intellectual inquiry from when I was 19 years old. And we've both ended up as having an academic career. And Pila and Kai, another organic intellectual from Makanda. And also, very importantly, Professor Roger Southall, who was professor here of politics, who took a risk on me by offering me a lectureship back in 1992. And Professor Richard Haynes, who was also at Rhodes University at the time, and who drew me back into academia in Gqeberha. And also, I would just like to acknowledge the late John Daniel, Marion Lacey, Rokajulu, all 3 of them liberation movement activists who were intellectuals who contributed academically to the politics department at Rhodes University, and who obviously were influential, enormously influential on me in my early academic career. And lastly, my late father, Professor Robin Cherry, who was a physicist, but who had a love of poetry and a strong social conscience. And thank you to them all, and thank you to you for your support over the years.